The stage lights dimmed, and the audience murmured with curiosity as a shy 12-year-old girl stepped onto the massive AGT stage. Her tiny shoes made almost no sound, but her presence filled the room with a quiet electricity. She held her hands together to keep them from shaking, longing to appear confident even though her heart felt like a drum rattling inside her chest. When Simon Cowell leaned forward to ask her name, her voice trembled as she introduced herself. The judges exchanged warm smiles, expecting a typical youthful performance, sweet, simple, innocent. But something in Simon's expression shifted when he asked, "What will you be singing today?" The girl hesitated, a long pause that made the entire theater hold its breath. She whispered the name of a classic, incredibly difficult song, one even trained adult vocalists avoid. Simon raised a hand and said softly, "Are you sure?" It wasn't said to discourage her, but to protect her from embarrassment. She nodded, eyes steady now, as if something inside her had awakened. The audience leaned in closer. Nobody expected greatness, not until she closed her eyes, breathed deeply, and the entire stage fell into a profound silence. In that silence, she found her courage, and the story that would shake the theater began to unfold. The very first note she delivered was so pure, so hauntingly clear, that several people in the front row gasped. It wasn't the voice of a child, it was powerful, mature, layered with emotional depth no one could have predicted. Simon instantly dropped his pen. Heidi placed a hand over her heart. Even the cameramen glanced at one another in disbelief. Her voice rose effortlessly, gliding through difficult transitions and soaring high notes with grace far beyond her age. Each lyric she sang carried the weight of stories unspoken, stories of loss, hope, dreams, and resilience. As she reached the song's first chorus, her voice filled the auditorium like a tidal wave of emotion, washing over every single person present. Audience members who moments ago were whispering now sat frozen, captivated. Her tone carried a richness that felt as though she had lived 1,000 lifetimes. Even the judges, who have heard thousands of young talents, were overwhelmed, trying to understand how a 12-year-old could produce a sound that felt angelic and timeless. The song built and built, and with each rising phrase, she unlocked a new dimension of her ability. She wasn't just singing, she was commanding the room. Midway through the performance, Simon lifted his hand again, but this time not to question her, this time to stop the music. The audience gasped in shock. The orchestra fell silent. The girl froze, terrified she had done something wrong. Her lower lip trembled, and her hands began to shake again. But Simon stood up slowly, walked toward the edge of the judging table, and said words that made the entire theater erupt in whispers. "This is unbelievable." He wasn't stopping her because she failed, he was stopping her because he wanted the world to hear her voice a cappella, raw and unfiltered. No music, no echo, just her. The girl's eyes widened, but she nodded, swallowing her fear. The conductor stepped back, the orchestra lowered their instruments, and the stage became still. Simon sat down again, staring at her intensely, as if ready to witness something historic. She took a breath that shook her shoulders, wiped a tear from her cheek, and began to sing again, this time with nothing but her soul guiding her. And what happened next shattered every expectation in the room. Her unaccompanied voice flowed into the air like a beam of light, warm and flawless. Without the orchestra, her talent became even more terrifyingly clear. She hit notes with laser precision, yet every note carried vulnerability, honesty, and emotion. People in the audience began crying, not because the song was sad, but because her voice felt like it was reaching into their hearts, touching places long forgotten. Her sound reverberated in the massive theater, hanging in the air with a purity that made time feel as though it had stopped. Even backstage, crew members paused to listen. The judges were speechless. Howie shook his head in disbelief. Sophia whispered, "This is magic." And Simon, known for his tough exterior, had softened completely. He looked genuinely moved, as if he had discovered a rare gem hidden in plain sight. The girl sang with a passion that didn't match her age. She reached the most difficult part of the song with a breathtaking vocal run, transitioning smoothly into a note that held for so long, so powerfully, that the entire crowd rose to their feet while she was still singing it. Her voice didn't crack, it didn't break, it only grew stronger. She transformed from a nervous child into a superstar right before their eyes. By the time she delivered her final note, a soft, lingering whisper that dissolved beautifully into silence, the theater exploded in applause, cheers, and tears. The audience jumped to their feet instantly, giving her a standing ovation that shook the entire room. The girl, overwhelmed, covered her mouth with both hands as tears streamed down her face. She couldn't believe what she had just done. She had come expecting nothing more than to share her voice, but she had delivered one of the greatest performances the AGT stage had ever seen. The judges looked stunned, each struggling to find words. Heidi stood first, clapping wildly and shouting, "This is what AGT is all about." Sophia agreed, telling the girl she had the kind of voice that could touch millions. Howie wiped his eyes, calling her a miracle. And then all eyes turned to Simon, the judge whose approval meant everything. He looked at her with a mixture of pride, awe, and admiration. The girl trembled nervously, waiting. The room fell silent again. Simon took a deep breath, leaned toward his microphone, and said softly, "You were born to do this." And then, he stood up. With slow, deliberate steps, Simon walked around the judging table, never taking his eyes off the young girl who had just stunned him. The crowd sensed what was coming and began to cheer, louder and louder, building into a wave of excitement. The girl sobbed harder, shaking her head in disbelief. Simon approached the golden buzzer with the calmness of someone witnessing history. He looked at her with a rare softness and said, "This is one of the best auditions I've ever seen from someone your age." And then, he slammed his hand down. The golden buzzer detonated above her like a storm of glittering gold fireworks. Confetti rained from the ceiling, covering her like a blanket of golden dreams. She collapsed to her knees, overwhelmed, crying into her hands as her family rushed out to embrace her. The crowd screamed. The judges clapped. Simon smiled, the kind of smile he only gives when he knows he has found a once-in-a-generation talent. As she stood in the shower of gold, trembling with joy, one thing became clear. This 12-year-old girl had not only left Simon in awe, she had written her name into AGT history. Her journey had only begun, but the world would never forget the moment Simon stopped her, so she could shine even brighter.